Hey YouTubers, so in this video we are going to talk about mainly the differences between Celeron, Pentium, I-3, I-7, I-5, I-9, and I'm going to use this website CPUuserbenchmark.com just so you can see best the differences. Now, can't go into every level of Pentium, I-3, I-5, I-7, Celeron, because there's so many different versions. Not only are there the different generations, so some of these were up to the 9th generation for Intel, and there's not necessarily 9th generation for all of those chips yet. Remains to be seen what Intel will put out, if there'll be Celerons and if there'll be i3s and Pentiums and etc. Right now there's i5s and i7s and i9s for 9th gen. So we're going to just look at the 8th gen. Now the nice thing about this site is I will easily be able to pull up the CPUs, and you'll not only get an idea of the price, but you will also get an idea of the cores, the threads, and all that stuff. And hopefully, this will be the best version out there. I'm sure there's other people who have done this, and hopefully, none of them are better than me. But there may be. So, all right. So first here on the right, so Celerons are the cheapest and slowest desktop CPUs offered by Intel. And that said, if you check out my different channels, and there's links on the about there, you will see that I have done actual 4K gaming with Celeron 8th gen and actually with the 7th gen Pentium chip. That is quite impressive, obviously, but what that kind of tells you is you really need a good graphics card, right? And I did it with what I'll say is a so-so graphics card. So out of the box, all of these have built-in integrated graphics that work with the motherboard. They'll usually suck up about 2 gigs of your RAM. So what you will find though is gaming is not very good, whether it be the Celeron all the way up to the i7, if you do not have an additional video card. Relying on the UHD 630 graphics, you may run some stuff, decent stuff at 1080p, most likely low settings. You will not be able to do 4K gaming. I've experimented with just about everything, and that was a major disappointment. But if you throw in a decent graphics card, and we'll set that bar at the GTX 1050 Ti, which probably is about $150. You can 4K game with any of the CPUs that I'm going to bring up. Of course, you want a decent amount of RAM and a solid state drive. But alright, so looking at the chips, Celeron, like I said, is the slowest. You see we have 2 cores and 2 threads. So, and then you see the speed that it's running at, 3.1 versus the 3.9. These chips are so similar. It's just a matter of what Intel adds or takes away, or whether they unlock certain things to really determine how good the chip is. Looking at these with your human eyeball, it's really difficult to see any differences between these chips, besides seeing what the name is. So you kind of get an idea when you look at this website where the speed rank is. So the Celeron, out of the 1,137 chips that they have looked at, is ranked 446, and this is 8th gen. That means there are that many more chips ahead of it, whether they be 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th generation. The I-7 that was built many years ago is still more powerful than the Celeron. The Pentium, though, is 180th on the ranking, and of course, you know, this isn't only Intel chips but also AMD, so keep that in mind. And if you know, one day I plan to go through this whole list and really see, okay, how does this rank on the Intel side? You know, out of those 1137, how many are Intel and how many are AMD? So I can also check that out. All right, so then looking at this site, you'll see single core. So the single core mix score that it gives it. And you'll notice that the Pentium scores pretty high. The Celeron does not score that high. And this Pentium is really so super close to the i3. In a second, I'll change out the right side so you can see the i3. Where these chips are going to be really weak is when you start to talk about multi-core. And when you see 2 cores, obviously when it goes quad core, you know, it's really only 2 out of 4 cores, so you can't really score too good, right? You would think. Alright, so the other things you see is how old these chips have been out. So this is really a great website. Alright, so let's go ahead and put in what is the base i3, which would be the 8100, which I have. And we'll change this out so you can start to see the changes that happen between generations. And there are some really impressive i3 chips out there. The 8350 Kilo is a monster. It's really high up on the rankings. And for the money, it's probably the best value for a CPU right now. Alright, so now we're looking at this. So now we jump up to 4 cores, 4 threads. Okay, so speed is reduced, however this thing is much more capable. See, now it's 80th ranked. When I originally got my first i3, I believe it was 37, so it just shows you a lot of things change. And of course, this is all based on users out there, how they set up their computers. So if they're using crappy equipment with the i3s, which is probably pretty common, that's going to reflect in these scores. So that's one thing to keep in, you know, to think about really. If it's an awesome chip, most likely people have spent a lot of money on the other equipment to go with it. Alright, single core speed. You see the Pentium actually is higher for single core, but 4 cores versus 2 cores, obviously the i3 is going to beat it along with the multi-core score. So big difference there, you know, which kind of tells you whatever they use for the base cores for the Pentium, whatever this turns into would probably be a monster compared to the i3. So that Pentium's only been out 7 months. Not too much more in here to look at. You see the different caches. Obviously, the bigger this number is, the more effective it's going to be. Alright, so now let's change out the left side to the i5. And I think the base one is the, let's say 8400 right there. So now you see we've added 2 more cores, 2 more threads, which should mean this thing should destroy the i3 8100 in some of the things. Maybe not everything, but let's see. So now it's 36 ranked. And you'll start to notice over here some of the differences. Even more powerful for gaming, desktop score, workstation. Really, this is where you should see the difference. The CPU does not make that big a difference for gaming. It's more in your graphics card. So this is where you start to see that people are starting to spend more money on their graphics cards than these. A lot of cheap desktops like the Dell Vostro, and there's an Acer one that don't have graphics cards, have been put, into this. So it kind of kills these scores. All right, so single core. If we look back, the Pentium still is stronger in the single core, which tells you that that part of it is probably in a higher end I-5 or the higher end I-3. Quad core, as you would expect, it would be higher for the I-5 along with the multi-core. Multi-core now is just boom, blowing it away. So here's something. Thermal design power, 65 watts. So you'll notice some of these chips are 65, 91, and some other variations. The bigger that number gets, the more likely you are to need a bigger power supply. So keep that in mind if you're building a computer, that not only do you have to kind of keep track of that, but also your graphics card might suck up a lot of power. Now this lithography, this is a manufacturing process, 14 nanometers. You will see this hopefully get even smaller in the future, which will allow them to put more stuff on the chips. So base clock speed, our i3 is actually a higher base clock, but the i5 on turbo can go 4 gigahertz versus 3.6, so it's pretty good. Down here, we talked about this earlier, UHD 630, so all these 8 gen are going to have the 630. Cache is even greater with the i5, and something that they add here with the i5 is this turbo boost tech. Alright, so let us change out this side to the i7, and this one, this is the cheapest one. We actually own this one here at the house, but I'll put this one in here just because I'm curious how it compares. So the i7 8700, not the kilo version, which is even more awesome for gaming. This ranks 17th out of 1,137. And you start to see the gaming scores, desktop scores, workstation scores go way up. So this is probably averaging out because people are buying the 1080 Ti, maybe a 1070 Ti, just a 1070, and the i7 8700 kilo will not get you that high of a gaming score, just so you know. A lot more things come into play. Alright, so now the single core speed is higher. That's good to see, and it outdoes the Pentium at this point. Quad core is a little better, not significantly, but the multi-core is way more impressive. So things to think about, gaming wise, single core is definitely more valuable than the multi-core score. Multi-core scores are good for rendering. So whether you've got something like a HitFilm Pro, 3ds animation, Photoshop rendering, things like that, which verify whether they actually use the multi-cores for the softwares. But it's more for those things. I don't even think, I do a lot of CAD stuff. It's definitely nicer to have more horsepower, but not all that stuff is optimized for multi-core. So you may find you actually don't need the multi-core. What you need is a higher single core speed. Alright, so of course we see the price of the chips, and these using up relative low TDP. Both of them have 6 cores, but now you add more threads, which is important. Same manufacturing process there. Base clock is 3.2. The turbo is what really kicks this thing into gear. And let's see, 12 megs of cache, so that continues to increase. Let me throw in the 8700 kilo just so we can see a few differences. Hopefully, it is the 13th ranked, so a little higher operating speed, 12 threads, which I think we already noted that. Single core speed, single core score is slightly higher. Quad core, and I'm not sure that the mixed multi-core was a little bit bigger. Now this does use more power, so that was the reason I wanted to show this one. And your turbo clock speed is a little greater. So that's just basically that one, kind of like on steroids, we'll say. It's a little boosted. Alright, so one more to check out, if we can find it. I-9 and there it is. Where is that it? Interesting. Well, we'll have to use this one. Okay, so this is almost like looking at car engines, really. The cores are almost like cylinders, and the threads are like valves. We'll just go with that. So this has 10 cores, 20 threads, running at 3.8 gigahertz. You see how expensive that chip is. There are obviously some more expensive chips out there. Now, single core, not as impressive, okay? But when you put all this stuff together, maybe not the quad core, but multi-core is off the charts. So you may find that this computer actually is not that awesome for gaming, but it would be for some of the other things we talked about to take advantage of multi-core. Look at that TDP, 140 watts. You will probably need, for this setup for gaming, you're probably going to end up with a 750 watt power supply. And max memory size, so there's something to note, 128 gigs. That's pretty high. But yeah, hopefully this helps you out understanding some things. You know, here's the latest i9 9900, which is actually cheaper. Let's see how this one compares. Rank 3rd. That is one of the highest single core scores you're going to see, 155 points. This would make an ideal gaming rig, but you see the multi-core is actually a little less, depending on which one you use. It's the peak one, sorry. This is the one for the average user. So 95 watts, doesn't use as much power, so they were able to reduce that. 16 megs of cache, that's pretty amazing. And that's about it. So thanks for checking out my video. Please like, please subscribe.